So good evening, everyone. My name is Maurya Hanspal, and in this session, we're gonna continue our previous sessions on the topics of working capital management. So in the previous session, we touched the introduction about the working capital management. Also, we talked about the working capital, the gross working capital, the net working capital, the working capital gap. Also, we talked about the working capital leverage ratio. That was nothing but the sensitivity of the change in the return on investment to the change in current assets. So, all that we try to understand. Then we also try to talk about the three approaches in working capital, that is, the hedging approach, the conservative approach, and the aggressive approach. In that approaches, the aggressive approach was the most risky approach. Then we also talked about how to calculate the net operating cycle, the gross operating cycle by taking the raw materials conversion period, the work in progress conversion period, the finished goods conversion period, the debtors conversion period, and the creditors conversion period. And we tried to analyze that. So before going further in today's session, so we would like to talk about one trade-off in working capital. And that trade-off in working capital is the trade-off between liquidity. The trade-off is between liquidity and profitability. Because everywhere, like when we talk, be it in finance or be it like any other topic in finance, there is always a trade-off. Like when we talk about the returns, like when someone is providing capital to the company, either in the form of the equity shares or through debt, there is a trade-off between the equity shareholders and the debt holders. And that we have discussed in the previous session, the trade-off between the two. If one is benefiting, it is not always true that the other would always benefit. The benefit can also come at the cost of the other one. So that also we tried to analyze in the previous sessions, but not particularly in the context of working capital. So when we talk about the working capital management, there is always a trade-off between the liquidity and profitability. And what exactly is this trade-off? So when we talk about working capital, we are focused mainly on the short-term needs or the short-term working capital. That is, we must have adequate cash or adequate current assets to pay off the short-term liabilities, or adequate cash or the adequate current assets to be used for the day-to-day activities the company must have. So the company must have adequate amount of current assets, we can say in short, to maintain a state of liquidity. Okay. So if the company wants to maintain a state of liquidity, so what would the company would have to do? The company would have to invest in current assets. And when the company is investing huge amount in current assets, then an appropriate amount of the investments in fixed asset would have to be reduced. Because obviously there is a trade-off and the company has a limited amount of money. If in the earlier times the company was investing into fixed assets, but now the company wants to invest in current assets. So as we call it, the way of the common sense approach. If the company wants to invest more in current assets now and less in fixed assets now, okay, the company would have to take a proportion from the fixed assets and invest in current assets, right? Now the company is investing more into current assets, and the investment in current assets would lead to more working capital, as well current assets would increase. But ultimately, when the firm wants to earn long-term profitability, the firm earns the long-term profits or returns only from the long-term investments. And the long-term investments are in the form of fixed assets. So now there is a trade-off. If a person or if a company wants to maintain liquidity, the company would be focusing on increasing the current assets and investing in more of current assets and less in fixed assets. As a result, the liquidity of the company would increase, but the profitability of the company would reduce. Because in this case, the company is having lesser amount of fixed assets. But now, if the company realizes that the profitability of the company is being reduced, so the company would shift funds from the current assets to the fixed assets. And now, if the company has moved in funds from current assets to fixed assets, the profitability of the company would increase because the fixed assets or the long-term assets would like bringing the long-term returns or the long-term profitability to the company. But now the firm has lesser amount of current assets. And the lesser amount of current assets means less working capital. And the less working capital further means less liquidity. So there is always a trade-off between the two. If liquidity of the company has to increase, there is a subsequent reduction in the profitability of the company. If the profitability of the company has to increase, there is a subsequent reduction in the liquidity of the company. So ideally, a company must strive to balance between the two to achieve the maximum advantage so that the company has working capital as well. Also, the company has long-term profitability as well by investing into fixed assets. So this trade-off must be clear to everyone, like when we talk about working capital management. Okay. So now we would be talking about the second context after the operating cycle approach. In this context, like we would be talking about the inventory management. Inventory management and how to calculate your inventory cost. And then we would be talking about like one of the most useful methods or models which is used in inventory management. So that we would be talking about. So when we talk about inventories, obviously inventory is a part of current assets, right? And there are three things which are included in inventory and that we also talked about in the chapter of operating cycle, right? Three things are: the first thing, you have the raw material, which is the input that you are kind of procuring from outside. Then you have the work in progress, that is your processing on that input. And then you have the finished goods or the final goods. Once the final good is ready or the final output, and that is to be ready to be sold in the market. Okay, so what should be the main aim of inventory management? Or a person who is the inventory manager, so what must be the main aim of that inventory manager? The main aim of the inventory manager is to reduce the total inventory cost. And total inventory cost can only be reduced when the raw material cost is less, when the processing cost in the form of the work in progress is less, and when the finished goods final amount or the cost of the finished good in manufacturing that finished good is least, right? So the main aim of an inventory manager or an inventory head is to minimize the cost of inventory. Okay. So obviously, like if we want to minimize the cost of inventory, then we need to know that how to calculate the cost of inventory. Okay, so ideally the cost of inventory is calculated as your carrying cost plus your storage, your ordering cost. Okay, so your inventory cost is the summation of your carrying cost and the ordering cost. The carrying cost is also called your storage cost. It is one and the same thing. Okay. Or, yes, so like we'll keep it simple. So carrying cost is also called your storage cost plus your ordering cost. And when you add both of these, you get your total inventory cost. So now the task of the inventory manager or the inventory head is to minimize the total cost of inventory. So before going on to the calculations, we'll try to understand the differences between the carrying cost and the ordering cost. So what exactly is the carrying cost? So carrying cost is also called your storage cost. So it basically means that when you are trying to purchase the inventories and you are storing those inventories in the godown, there is a cost associated with storage. Like for example, you purchase some commodities or the raw materials per se, and you store in your warehouse or your factory. Now there would be charges, and the charges would be like to prevent spoilage of that material. Like you might be spraying some pesticides, herbicides, or fertilizers to avoid it to be eaten by rats or cats. Electricity ka kharcha. Like you might be using some air conditioning facilities for some kind of perishable goods. You might be having a guard like for the safety of the warehouse, right? And there must be like cost of some infrastructure as well. There must be cost of insurance as well. Like for example, if the godown catches fire, then you must insure your godown or warehouse as well. So all these costs which are associated in keeping that items at a place of storage. So all these are called the carrying cost or the storage cost. But now what do we mean by the ordering cost? So ordering costs are something when we are ordering something from the third party or a second party per se. Okay, so there might be some cost associated with it. Okay, and the cost can increase by the frequent number of orders. That is, as much we order, like हम जितना ज़्यादा हम ऑर्डर कर रहे हैं उतनी हमारी ऑर्डरिंग कॉस्ट बढ़ेगी. बट ये ऑर्डरिंग कॉस्ट कम कैसे हो सकती है? Either if we are ordering in bulk, because when we are ordering in bulk, the per unit cost it tends to reduce. Or the other way, how the ordering cost can reduce? The ordering cost can reduce by keeping a large amount of inventories, by ordering in bulk and keeping them in the warehouse. तो वहां पे तुम्हारी ordering cost कम हो जाएगी. But the ordering cost is nothing but in the simpler sense the cost of ordering your material or getting your material or procuring that material. अब इसमें carrying cost भी है, we have the ordering cost also. Okay. अब now there would be a trade-off between the two. Obviously, there is a trade-off again between carrying cost and ordering cost. If management or the inventory head is trying to minimize the carrying cost, how can the person minimize the carrying cost? Now, the person can minimize the carrying cost by not keeping inventory in the godown and ordering it on the demand basis. कि अपने गोडाउन में सामान नहीं रखा एंड जैसे जैसे ऑर्डर आ रहा है, ठीक है, तो मान लो कि सामान मंगाया. अब now when the company is ordering on demand, the ordering cost would be huge, right? Because now the company is not ordering in bulk and keeping it in the warehouse. Now the company is ordering like per demand. एक ऑर्डर आया तो कंपनी ने मतलब किसी लाइक सेकंड पार्टी से मंगा लिया, देन फिर दूसरा ऑर्डर आया, देन कंपनी ने फिर मंगा लिया, तो कंपनी की दी ऑर्डरिंग कॉस्ट वुड इंक्रीज, राइट? बट if the company is trying to minimize its ordering cost, then its carrying cost would increase. Because agreed, now the company is not ordering, but the company is keeping it in the warehouse. तो वहां पे सारे खर्चे आ जाएंगे, योर कॉस्ट ऑफ इंश्योरेंस, कॉस्ट ऑफ पिलफरेज, चौकीदार का खर्चा, एयर कंडीशनिंग, पेस्टिसाइड्स, so all these things like would come into place. Okay, so that thing you need to know. Yeah. So I think that we should start with a numerical noun. Okay. So like before going to the numerical, there is a kind of like what do we say? A hidden cost in inventory management. Okay. And now what can be this hidden cost? If we try to add one more cost, that is the cost of stockouts or the stockout cost of stockouts. So what exactly is the cost of stockout? Like for example, there is a shop A, okay, and if the customer goes to that shop A and demands something, and the shop A says that the stock is out and we are like not having inventory for that, okay. So in that case, the customer B, he would be going to some other shop, and from other shop he might get that commodity or that good. Now the shop A is losing the customers, and he might lose a large amount of customers because now the customers are not coming to his shop and they have become a customer of shop C. So that is the cost of stockouts, and that is somewhere interrelated with the carrying cost and the ordering cost, right? Because ultimately मान लो कि stock out कब होता है, like when you do not have the material in your godown or warehouse. So like in order to have the material you have to incur higher carrying cost. अब हायर कैरिंग कॉस्ट बढ़ेंगे तो मान लिया कि ऑर्डरिंग कॉस्ट कम हो जाएगी, ओके. बट ऑर्डरिंग कॉस्ट की भी नीड हो सकती है. मान लो लाइक इफ अ पर्सन हैज ऑर्डर्ड समथिंग एंड स्टोर्ड इन द वेयर हाउस, बट लाइक द मार्केट चेंजेस कंटिन्यूसली एंड द मार्केट इज डायनामिक, okay. A product which is prevalent or useful in this year, it might not be useful in the next year. And the same thing happens in case of the fashion industry because fashion changes continuously. So there you cannot store in the warehouse. So वहाँ पे the ordering cost will be more. Okay, so there is always a trade-off that you need to understand. Okay. See, like when we talk about this thing, yeah, there is one prominent model. Okay, see, ideally, like if in the question they mentioned you that the ordering cost has been given as something, the carrying cost has been given as something, or the stock out cost has been given as something, and calculate the total inventory cost. So in that case, like you would be adding all the three and you would be getting the answer. But the most important model that we use here is your EOQ model. Your EOQ model is the economic order quantity model. Economic order quantity model. And this model is used to minimize the cost of inventory. Okay. And this model we would be talking about in the next session today. Okay. So see you in the next session.